In this game from Logical Chess Move by Move, we're going to see what can happen when one side falls behind in development and exactly how the other side can punish it. Let's jump in. We get d4, d5 and c4, a queen's gambit. Now in this game, black chooses to accept the gambit by capturing on c4. Now the reason that white is prepared to give up this pawn is twofold. First of all, white knows that they can almost always recover the pawn pretty quickly. And second of all, it gives white great prospects to take over the centre. The pawn on d5 prevents white from playing e4 straight away. So once that pawn is deflected over to c4, it's possible for white to play e4, gaining great central control. But in the game, instead of this, white played e3, which is solid. Now, here black chose to play bishop to f5, which is inaccurate. Now this game took place all the way back in the 19th century, and back then they didn't have the knowledge of opening theory that we do these days. This move is very rarely played by strong players anymore, but it's an accuracy that you could definitely see in your own games if you're below master strength. The idea is actually very logical. Black is trying to get their light squared bishop out from behind the pawn chain before playing e6. Just to show the contrast of that, if black did play e6, well, let's say that white captured on c4 and then both sides play normal developing moves. They both castle, and you can see that the light squared bishop finds it hard to get into the game because the pawn on e6 is blocking it. So black is attempting to solve this problem by getting the bishop out first. But anyway, bishop to f5 has its own drawback, as we'll see. So white does capture on c4, and now e6 comes. And the problem is a very common problem for black when they move their light squared bishop out, is that white can play queen to b3. Now this is quite annoying. There's the possibility of capturing on b7. There's also the possibility of giving a check on this diagonal if the c pawn ever moves, because the light squared bishop is not in any position to block that check, and it's not in a position to defend this pawn. So this pressure comes very early, and black responds to it with bishop to e4. Now this does defend the pawn, but it's moving the same piece twice in the opening, which according to the opening fundamentals is generally to be avoided. So white plays f3, moving a pawn and winning a tempo against the bishop. So now the bishop's got to move. Now in the game, the bishop went to c6, which is a mistake. Instead, the bishop should have gone to d5, because that still defends the pawn on b7, but doesn't have the drawbacks that we're about to see with the bishop on c6. Maybe black didn't like the look of the ability of white to play e4, winning another tempo and gaining more space in the center. But after these trades, black is okay. Black is still in the game. There's not this pressure on the b7 pawn anymore because the queen's not on b3 anymore. But on c6, the bishop is blocking the most natural developing square for the queenside knight, and it's also blocking the ability of black to be able to play c5. Now c5 is often a move that black needs to play in order to disrupt white's centre. But with the bishop on c6, this isn't possible, and we're going to see why this becomes a problem later. If you're enjoying the video so far, please do me a quick favour and subscribe to the channel. I'll be continuing the series on Logical Chess Move by Move very soon, so by subscribing, you won't miss out on any of the future videos, as I cover Kürschner's classic book. So white just keeps developing, knight to e2, and then we get knight to f6 from black. And now we get e4 from white, taking over the centre, and as mentioned, black really wants to be able to play c5 to disrupt white's strong centre here. But that's not possible because of the bishop. Now, black plays bishop to e7, preparing to castle, and it's quite interesting what white does here actually. White plays knight to c3, not rushing to castle, and this seems to create a threat. This is mentioned in the book, that the threat is to play d5, and that would seem to create a lot of problems for black. I'll just show the line that caused black to play the move that he did in the game, because black played queen to c8, which is a mistake. The line that black was worried about, and the line that was pointed out in the book, is if black castles, then the move d5 would seem to be a problem. Because it seems that after black captures, and white captures back, and then the bishop moves out of harm's way to d7, that the pawn on b7 falls. And now the rook in the corner is actually trapped. There's no square for the knight to go to, which is safe, and so white wins material. But the line that the player didn't see in the game, and the line that Kürschner also didn't see in the book, is retreating the bishop instead to e8. Because now if white does the same thing, well, black can play knight to d7. This is the move that wasn't possible when the bishop was instead on d7. And it's actually quite risky for white to take this pawn. If white is not careful, and white, let's say, castles here, which I think is very natural, well then black can win material. So rook to b8, and then if the white queen captures on a7, well that's simplest of all. There's just simply this fork with the bishop. And if the white queen instead goes to a6, well then there's rook to b6, winning another tempo. Where does the queen go? Well, let's say it goes to capture on a7. Seems reasonable. Well, then there's the check anyway from the bishop. So then the king moves out of the way. And then the move rook to b4. Now this unveils an attack on the queen and also attacks the light squared bishop. White can try defending with queen to a6, but then there's knight to b8. Okay, so it's pretty unrealistic to see all of that all the way back in this position, I'll grant you. But still, maybe it's worth bearing in mind that it's difficult, or risky at least, for white to capture this pawn on b7. Because in that line that we just saw, white needs to be careful, right? Because after knight to d7, at the very least, black is going to be able to win some tempos back, get the rook active. Even if you don't see the entire line, I think it's clear to see that the white queen is a bit short on squares. Now, let's get back to the game, because in the game, queen to c8 was played. Now, this is very slow. As mentioned, black should have castled, getting their king out of danger. But queen to c8, that's very passive, just defending this pawn. And what white did now was to take advantage of that, with the move d5. Now, black took with the pawn, and very importantly here, white took back with the pawn themselves. It would be wrong to recapture with the piece, because then black can liquidate some pieces and eventually get their king safe. So that would see a lot of white's advantage disappear. But after d5 capturing, white did take back with the pawn. This is important. This wins a tempo against the light squared bishop. And now the light squared bishop goes back to d7, and we've got the first critical moment of the game. Now, if you're looking to improve your performance in the critical moments of the game, then I help ambitious adults at the below 2000 ELO level achieve the types of results in chess that they dream about. So if that sounds like you, you're a below 2000 ELO player and you'd like my help, click the link in the description below. We can set up a time to chat, hear all about your goals in chess, and see if working together to achieve them will be a good fit. So let's do an evaluation here. Well, white still isn't castled, but if black is given time, then black will be able to solve their problems. So, for example, if white were to castle, then black would castle too, and we've got a more or less equal position. Maybe black is a bit cramped, but it's nothing too much. So in a position like this, this is what's known as a dynamic advantage, in that white's advantage relies on playing with urgency. If black is given time, as I just showed, by a slow move such as castling, well then black will castle as well and will be okay. So the energetic move that you have to play in such positions is a move such as d6. Now, this is actually not a pawn sacrifice. It might seem to be, but white is able to gain the pawn back very quickly. Now this attacks the bishop. It's a forcing move, so black has no choice but to respond to it, and black did so by capturing on d6, but now white can capture on f7, and the black king loses castling rights. Now which way should the king go? It's already very bad for black, but which is the least bad of the options? Well, in the book, the author mentioned that king to f8 was not preferred because it seems to shut in the rook on h8, which is true. It's going to be very hard for this rook to get back into the game. But the move chosen instead, king to d8, is pretty much suicidal. It's just going to be too hard now for black to defend all of the threats. Everything is going to end up pinned. Everything is going to end up discoordinated, as we'll soon see. And you could get a situation like this in your games, and it's important to know how to punish your opponent if you end up in such a favourable position. I mean, we can all think of situations where our opponent has been in such dire straits but has somehow managed to wriggle out of danger and end up turning around the game to draw or even win. So how do you play in such situations? Well, let's see how Tarrasch did it. It started with bishop to g5. Now that develops a piece while also introducing a pin. The knight on f6 is one of the few black pieces which was playing a good role, developed to a good square. But after bishop to g5, the knight can't move. So black tries to develop with knight to c6. And again, it's interesting to see how white plays here. You'll notice that white is not castling themselves just yet. So in such situations where your opponent is in trouble, you need to keep playing forcing moves. As I showed before in that earlier situation where white played d6, you don't want to give your opponent time to consolidate. And white continued this. So after bishop g5, knight c6, white looked to pile up the pressure on the pinned piece. Okay, so that knight on f6 is pinned. Let's add an extra attacker to it. Knight to e4. So now there's a clear threat of taking this knight and then winning the exchange. So black couldn't allow that, played bishop to e7. So now white decided to eliminate that knight, seeing as it wasn't pinned anymore. Black took back with the pawn. If black took back with the bishop instead, well then white would take, and this pawn is isolated and will be a target. That wouldn't even be the worst of black's problems, but it would just add to the litany of problems that black is facing. So instead, g takes, so at least this bishop is still around, helping to defend. And now white castled queenside. Castling queenside is better than castling kingside, because white wants to add another pin to black's position. Castling queenside does that, because now the rook's on d1, facing the black king, introducing threats like bishop to e6 or even queen to e6. So black is in an extreme amount of danger here. I mean, look at the evaluation bar. It's already showing plus 4.5 in white's favour, and white isn't up any material, it's worth noting. But it's just the discoordination of black's forces, the king's safety, the fact that the queen is on c8, and if we look at the next moves, knight to e5, okay, trying to get rid of one of the attackers, but then white answers this with knight to f4. This is a forcing move, okay? This is a forcing move with a forcing threat. The threat is to play knight to e6 checkmate. The bishop can't capture because it's pinned. If black were to capture on f7, then that doesn't actually help black's situation at all. Black is still faced with the threat of knight to e6 checkmate, and actually it's showing a forced checkmate here for white. So eliminating the bishop doesn't really help black. So what can black do instead? Bishop to f8, trying to create a square for the king on e7. But then we get queen to e6, introducing another threat of actually coming into e8 with checkmate. Again, the bishop can't recapture due to the pin. So if the bishop did go back here, trying to stop the queen to e8 idea, well then white can actually give up the queen, and if black wants to accept the sacrifice. And of course, if black doesn't accept the sacrifice, he's just down a knight. But if the queen is taken, then we get knight to e6, checkmate. Notice how the bishop blocks the e8 square, and black is actually smothered by a lot of its own pieces. So bishop to f8 doesn't work. So the move that black tried was queen to b8, trying to create an escape square for the king. But just look at how sad this queen is. I mean, the most powerful piece on the board for black, and it's consigned to being behind a wall of its own pawns. I mean, this should be where the king should be, right? The king should be behind a wall of its own pawns, not the queen. The queen should be out participating in the game. But instead it's on an extremely passive square, and so is the rook. Yeah, this is really bad for black. If you hadn't figured it out already, there's no coming back from a position like this. So white played queen to e6. Black played rook to f8, and now white captured on f6. And black has a choice here of how they want to lose. Let's run through the options, because some of them are pretty spectacular. Option number 1. What if the rook takes the bishop on f7? Well, then in that case, then white can capture on d7, giving up the rook. If the rook is taken, then it's checkmate and 1. And if the rook is not taken and black plays the only other legal move on the board, well, you don't even really need to calculate this. Just seeing that the queen can give a discovered check to the black king should be enough to reach a position like this and find the checkmate. One way to do it is rook takes e7 check, and then after the king goes back to the d file, then rook to e8 is checkmate. So that's option 1. How else could black lose here? Well, black could also lose by playing bishop takes f6. That knight was quite dangerous in that other line, so that's also possible. Well, then the line given in the book was to capture on f6 with check, king to c8, and then white can win more material by capturing on e5. And if black tries to take back on f7, well, then the simplest is queen to h8 check. And the only ways to block the mate are not going to block the mate for long. This is the longest that black can prolong things, but isn't that a sad state of affairs with the king checkmated this way? So that's option 2. Option 3 for how black could lose. Well, you could play queen to c8, trying to add an extra defender to the d7 square. So how can white win now? Well, capturing the knight on e5, and if black tries to capture back a piece of their own, let's say with rook takes f7, well, then there's checkmate. One knight guards the e8 square, and the other knight delivers mate to the black king. The bishop can't take due to the pin. So the fourth option for how to lose is the one chosen in the game, and that was bishop to d6, just trying to block the d file with everything black has got. So white captured on d7, black took back, and now white actually played a quiet move here, which provoked resignation. The quiet move was rook to e1. The threat actually is to play queen to e8 check. Let's just show that. Let's just give white another move. Well, queen to e8 check. The rook has to take, and rook to e8 is mate. So a queen sacrifice to finish things off. The only other way to try and prolong things would be to give the black king an escape square via c6. But then the bishop just drops, and white is up a piece with the attack. So black chose to resign instead after rook h to e1. If you enjoyed this video on logical chess move by move, then click here to check out the next video in the series. As you've seen, every game from Kürschner's classic book will help deepen your understanding of chess middle games and help you secure more victories.